For as long as we can remember, humanity has always been interested in exploring the vast world of space beyond our planet. And what better place to start than on the moon? Plans to step foot on the moon started way back in 1960. Initially, the goal was to send a three-man team to orbit the moon, not land on it. It was during the famous speech of then-President John Kennedy in 1962 that the dream of landing a man on the moon before 1970 was crystallized in the heart of America. And Kennedy's dream did come to pass when the first man on the moon, Neil Armstrong, took his first steps in 1969. But accomplishing this vision came with a lot of labor and sacrifices. The government had to recruit the brightest minds and experts to work on this project, and a ton of financial resources were poured into it. However, even so, the first mission wasn't even close to success. The Apollo 1 mission, which was the first attempt by NASA to visit the moon with astronauts, tragically ended in disaster. The astronauts Virgil Grissom, Edward White, and Roger Chaffee lost their lives when a fire broke out in the spacecraft's command module, destroying everything. The mission failed. NASA had to conduct a series of investigations into the incident and extensively rework the command module. They finally decided it would be best to add another launch vehicle that would carry the main payload, the Lunar module. Subsequent missions from Apollo 4 to 9 were focused on testing the newly improved spacecraft and adding more features. No missions were designated Apollo 2 or 3 because these early missions seemed more like repetitions of Apollo 1 but didn't feature any crew on board, so NASA decided to leave them out of the numbering. Apollo 10 was a major milestone in this journey. It was the fourth human spaceflight mission in the Apollo program, and this time, the astronauts successfully circled the moon and returned without any issues. The Apollo 10 mission set the stage for Apollo 11. The only difference being that Apollo 11 was the mission where the astronauts actually landed on the moon. The astronauts didn't land on the moon. By this time, scientists had studied and learned so much about the moon that they could predict its surface and weather conditions. They replicated these details and scenarios to train the astronauts before sending them to the moon. Telescopes, space probes, and satellites had already provided us with a wealth of knowledge about the moon. However, landing on the moon and retrieving samples from it was a completely different experience. The trial Apollo missions helped NASA understand what it would take to transport humans to the moon and back. When Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin stepped foot on the moon, it marked a phenomenal moment in history that was celebrated worldwide. Apollo 11's huge success inspired NASA to launch subsequent missions to the moon, and it also inspired other world leaders to make their own moon landing attempts. However, since the first mission, certain unexplained phenomena and conspiracy theories have sprung up, along with several leaked information from whistleblowers. One of the many conspiracies is that the moon landing was staged and never happened. As obscure as this might sound, there is a lot of evidence backing this claim. For example, if you observe most NASA clips featuring astronauts on the moon, you'll find that there are no stars in the sky. Stars are usually visible in images taken from space probes and telescopes, so their absence in Apollo mission photos and videos raised suspicions. NASA has debunked this claim, explaining that the lighting conditions and the type of camera used back then made the stars appear less bright and invisible. Conspiracy theorists have also pointed out the lack of a blast crater on the moon to indicate where the Apollo craft landed. NASA countered this claim by stating that the layer of dust covering the moon's surface absorbed the impact of the descending craft, so there was no visible crater. Over 50 years have passed since Armstrong and Aldrin first stepped foot on the moon, but their footprints are still visible, and other evidence left behind by the astronauts has been confirmed today. This, along with other factors, strengthens the claim that the United States government did indeed land on the moon, and that the people pushing conspiracy theories are mistaken. 6 Apollo missions followed after Apollo 11, with the official final Apollo mission being Apollo 17 in 1972. However, there are rumors that NASA may have conducted classified Apollo missions up to Apollo 20, some even suggesting encounters with alien life on the moon. While NASA has denied these claims, it adds fuel to the moonwalking hoax theory. Since Apollo 17, NASA hasn't launched another mission to the moon. Changes have occurred on the moon landing site, such as the degradation of the American flag planted on the moon and the coverage of items left behind by the first astronauts with fine moon dust. These changes make it difficult to identify the actual moon landing site through telescopes or space probes. Given these events, conspiracy theorists question why NASA now finds it difficult to land on the moon. With technological advancements, they argue that NASA should be able to land as many people as possible. NASA experts explain that it's because technology is so advanced now that we can observe the moon perfectly through space probes and telescopes. Scientists are more focused on learning about other planets and parts of our cosmos, where resources are being allocated. Furthermore, the Apollo missions have brought in a considerable amount of data, and scientists believe they have learned all they needed to know about the moon from the samples and data collected by Neil Armstrong and his colleagues. For instance, the moon rocks brought back from Apollo 11 provided valuable insights into the moon's composition and were even sold for a high price on the black market. One reason the moon landing cannot be a hoax is that it was broadcast live to not only America, but also other nations around the world. Although technology at the time was not as advanced as it is now, the Apollo camera was able to produce video in a monochrome TV format. These black and white video recordings were transmitted back to the NASA base, but sending them to broadcasting networks was initially impossible due to compatibility and poor video quality. However, radio transmissions were broadcast almost immediately, thanks to radio telescopes covering the event, such as the Goldstone Tracking Station in California and the Honeysuckle Creek Tracking Station and Parkes Observatory in Australia. Similar equipment in other nations also picked up these broadcast signals. Elon Musk believes the Russian government's close monitoring and lack of exposure, along with other nations' successful lunar missions, support the authenticity of the moon landing. Despite some arguments about waving flags and shadow inconsistencies, there is no credible evidence to support a moon landing hoax. The conspiracy theories originated from a book in 1976, but there is substantial evidence and Musk's support for the moon landing.